You can't help but laugh. Spencer Strider's going on the injured list with an oblique issue that apparently he's had for a little while. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on into a special emergency edition of Braves Today. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby. You can find all my written work, bravestoday.com. We're probably part of the Believe Podcast Network, presented to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com to get started. My goodness. Spencer Strider is going on the injured list with an oblique injury. Let's go through what we know about this. Let's talk about, are there any real options here? And then let's look at, let's discuss the whole offseason and how this went. Because I have a theory about injury creep and kind of how these things, I'm not going to say can sneak up on you, but how they can snowball faster than you're ready for. So starting off, we got the news this morning. Strider was scratched from his start against the Pirates in Bradenton, which is happening right now and also is not televised anywhere. Kind of frustrating. But the way that this happened, the timing and everything here is supposedly Strider felt oblique tightness in his most recent start. And then he felt it again in a bullpen session. So when they got to today, he was still having it this morning, so they scratched him. The quote from Walt Weiss, and this is coming from the AJC's Chad Bishop, who is in Northport with the team right now. Quote, "It's mild. He got out in front of it, but we're going to be cautious. We feel like we've gotten out in front of this thing to a degree, so we're hoping it's not going to be a big deal." Not a thing you kind of love to hear, right? You don't love to hear that that they're hoping it's not going to be a kind of severe thing. And Walt Weiss kind of acknowledged that part of the reason that they sound so uncertain here is obliques are really kind of tough, right? More from Weiss on this. Quote, "We don't know. We've all dealt with obliques in this game. You just don't know. I do feel better that when you put him through the tests and that type of thing, it's hard for him to feel it, but it is there when he throws. There's a chance if he would have went out and made a start, talking about throwing today in spring training, it would have set him back further. That's the silver lining in this thing." So the short term of this obviously kind of sucks. Spencer Strider was supposed to be the game 3 starter for the opening series against the Royals. So we got a little bit of updates there when it comes to what they plan to do, right? They're going to throw Grant Holmes in game 3. And after that, you kind of got to figure out what the plan is here, right? Not quite sure. Grant Holmes, Bryce Elder, I assume, is your 4. And so who is your 5th? Mark Bowman indicated that Walt Weiss said the plan was for Didier Fuentes to stay as a long reliever. Jose Suarez will likely be the 5th starter, and that they're evaluating what are their options to replace Strider in the rotation. And I do think there are a couple. Let's talk about the options real quick before we get into who to blame for this and all that kind of stuff. Really, your only options for a starting pitcher at this point in the schedule is Carlos Carrasco, Martin Perez, J.R. Ritchie, Didier Fuentes. That's it. You do have other prospects, right? Garrett Bowman looked really good in the spring breakout on Saturday. He's been in the lower minors. I mean, there's not a lot of options here. And there's pros and cons of each one of those guys. Carrasco and Perez are veterans that are clearly on the backside of their careers. I was very not impressed with Carlos Carrasco in spring training. Wasn't really impressed with Martin Perez, but I think he was okay. J.R. Ritchie is the ceiling option, but he's also the one that doesn't really have a floor here. He is the PPI option as well. If you want somebody who could win Rookie of the Year and get a draft pick, the only option you have is J.R. Ritchie. As a reminder of how that works, you have to be on at least 2 of the 3 accepted prospect lists. And I believe it's ESPN, Baseball America, and MLB Pipeline. You have to be on at least 2 of those 3. Fuentes is only on 1. You have to be rookie eligible now. Like Waldrop is not by a couple days. You have to be rookie eligible now, and you have to get 1 year of service time. Correcting some other reporting I've seen, you do not have to be on the roster on opening day. You have to spend 172 days on the roster. It's a 186-day season. So you pretty much have you have to be up within the first 2 weeks if you want to qualify for PPI and if you win Rookie of the Year. So that is the option with J.R. Ritchie. The pros and cons of Ritchie, that is the pro, right? That is the pro for Ritchie. The con for Ritchie is he's not on the 40-man roster, which you can make plenty of spots. That's not a problem. The other con for J.R. Ritchie is because he's not on the 40-man roster, you haven't had to start using his options. If you call J.R. Ritchie up and he's not ready, or you decide you'd rather keep somebody else once everybody is back, and, if that happens, right? If you get everybody back healthy, then you're in a situation where you have to option Ritchie down and use one of his 3 options. And we've not been great at the option stuff with some of the young pitchers. AJ Smith-Shawver is very young. He's entering his final option year. Dieter Fuentes is turning 21 this year, and he already, when he gets optioned down this year, if he does, he will be into his second of 3 option years, right? We've not been the best about popping these options very early before the players are ready. And so, that's the downside of Ritchie. But at this point, that downside doesn't feel like it's nearly as bad as the downside of counting on Martin Perez or counting on Carlos Carrasco to be actual major league caliber starting pitchers. I would rather, if you're going to lose this guy's game, I would rather let prospect J.R. Ritchie lose and learn and get better than an aging veteran. Carrasco's almost 40. Than an aging veteran to lose, and we not necessarily understand if he can get better. There's no real pathway to improving. You're just throwing a guy out there to get beat. I'd rather let the kid lose and learn something versus letting the veteran lose and the kid's in AAA. So the Braves haven't officially clarified what they want to do. I do think if you keep Dieter Fuentes as the long man in the pen, it's a little bit frustrating. I do think this is a situation where if you are going to put Martin Perez on the roster, which I don't think you should do, you need to put him in the bullpen and let Fuentes make the start versus letting Martin Perez make a start and putting Fuentes in the bullpen. Neither here nor there. In just a minute, let's talk about this overall offseason. Let's talk about what AA did, the choices he made, and how avoidable this could have been. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsey Crosby. Shout out to the 90-something of y'all who are in here live with us right now. This was kind of last minute and unprompted. I didn't put a tweet out letting everybody know I was going to do this and all that. So thank you for being here. If you have questions on this, throw them in the chat. I'll try to get to them towards the end of the year or towards the end of the show here. A lot has been made about the Braves not signing a starter this offseason. And let's be clear, it's not just this offseason. The Braves have not signed an established major league starter to be a major league starter in multiple years. They have brought in pitchers, but it's been either as an emergency thing, like when you brought in, Eric Fetty or Carlos Carrasco or whatever last year, or it's been grabbing a reliever with the intent of converting them into starting, like Ronaldo Lopez. They planned to do the same thing with Jeff Hoffman had they signed him. Instead, what they ended up doing is they have not gone and signed a starter. And the frustrating thing about this is, in retrospect, in hindsight, you knew injuries were coming. And I would argue a little bit of nuance to this, that AA said entering the offseason that the starting rotation was a front burner priority. And then they got positive health reports on everybody. Let's be clear. Entering spring training, everybody was healthy. It was the very end of his bullpen session before he reported that Schwellenbach reported an issue. It was at camp that Waldrop reported an issue, or in a game that Wentz got hurt, or apparently in a game and then a bullpen that Strider got hurt. Entering camp, they had a lot of options. And so I think you can, and just hear me out before you get mad, I think you can defend the idea in January of, we're not going to sign a number 5 starter just to sign a starter. We want somebody who is quality, who would bump guys out of the rotation, right? I think that's a defensible stance to take in December and in January, when they had positive health reports on everybody. Everybody looked like they were good to go. But as you got through camp, the injuries kept happening. And I think the issue here is, every time it happened, there were less and less options. And the options that were left were a little bit less desirable. I think, and this sounds dumb, if you had lost all 4 of these pitchers in the first week of spring training, I think, yeah, you sign Chris Bassett. They probably sign Chris Bassett and go out and get a Zach Littell or something like that. But when they lost just Schwellenbach, or when they lost Schwellenbach and just Waldrop, they said, hey, we have enough pieces to get through this. We don't need to bring in a back-end guy. And then they lost Wentz, but there were less guys available. And now they've lost Strider, and there's even less guys available. So I'm kind of calling this injury creep. Like, every time somebody went down, the situation got a little bit worse and a little bit worse. But the available options to you outside the organization were a little bit worse and a little bit worse. And you're at the point here where it really didn't make sense to pay market prices for very many of the guys in the free agent market this winter, simply because you would have lost, like, 1, the contracts, 2, but 2, the exact same, the draft pick you would have lost would have been the highest ever pick given up for a qualifying offer player. I don't necessarily, I would have been fine with Dylan Cease anyway, but I do understand, hey, giving up the contract you had to pay and a top 30 pick for a guy like definitely not a Ranger Suarez or a Framber Valdez or whatever was not appealing to me. But again, every time somebody got hurt, some of the other options had come off the table. It's kind of like the same situation. It's the same situation you have when Profar went down. By the time Profar went down, so many of the options you had to add a bat were already off the market. Michael Conforto had signed the week before. Randall Grichuk had signed the week before. So many guys had just gone off the market. There wasn't any great option to replace him. And so because of that, you ended up having to just kind of stick with Dom Smith and Kyle Farmer as your DH platoon. And what's frustrating here is Spencer Strider's owed $20 million this year, and then $22 million next year, and $22 million the year after that. And even if you exclude the elbow issue and the surgery that he had, the internal brace that he had, this is now the second injured list stint since he came back from that. He missed a month with a hamstring last year. We don't know how long he'll miss with this oblique. It could be 2 weeks. It could be a month. We don't know. And we saw he was not the same version of himself after the hamstring strain last year that he was before. I talked about this like last week. The hamstring strain really kind of sapped his power. He had a start in the minors, a rehab start in the minors, where he was putting up like 19 inches of IVB and a fastball at like 97. And then after the hamstring strain, he never got back to that point the rest of the season. My concern is the oblique injury does the same thing for Strider this year. And again, we don't know if it's going to or not. We don't know how long they're going to keep him on the injured list. We don't know how long they're going to keep him on the rehabbing and all of that. We don't know what it's going to take here, but it's not great. And I've seen a couple questions come up in the chat here. I want to address it real quick. Here's one from our buddy Emmanuel. Is it time to evaluate how much responsibility for this injuries we attribute to players training on their own and away from the team? And then I've seen a variation of this about, is it time to address the training staff? I think there's two things at play here. Thing number one is, for the most part, the worst thing a pitcher can do for their body is to pitch. Like, it is terrible for your body to actually pitch. And I remember talking to Spencer Strider in spring training one year, maybe it was 24. And he said, like, after you've thrown at full intensity one time in spring training, you're never 100% the rest of the year. Like, you're always sore. You're always trying to fight through what is normal soreness versus what is outside soreness. I think that this is something about the way that modern pitching as a whole, and not the Braves specifically, but modern pitching as a whole, is so focused on max effort for as long as possible, chasing velocity and all of that stuff. And I don't know if there's a simple fix. Now, at the same time, it is frustrating that it feels like the Braves have been hit by this a lot harder than almost anybody else. I don't think there's another team in baseball right now that from the start of camp to today is down 4 starting pitchers that they came into camp with. Like, there's been teams that lost a guy or 2 guys or whatever. I don't think there's a team that's lost 4. Just like last year, there wasn't a team that had all 5 opening day starters on the 60-day at the same time. We lost the top 6 starters last year when you count Strider missing a month for Tommy John. I'm sorry, for the hamstring strain. To Emmanuel's point, I do think that maybe training methods as a whole need to be discussed. But I also think this is part of the reason why you saw these starters not pushing velocity that much in spring. Think back to Strider's 24 season, right? He came into spring training ready for the season. He was pumping gas from day one. And he had an issue right there. Like, he went down in the second start of the year, right? Ronaldo Lopez was throwing much harder in 25 than he was this year, and he went down pretty quickly. They have to take time to ramp up. I do want to address something, and I'm not calling anybody out with this. I've seen a lot of people say a variation of the comment that all of this was predictable in December. And I want to push back a little bit, because I think it was predictable that the Braves would have someone go down, right? I heard AA say that. I heard Walt Weiss say that. Like, they knew they would lose a starter or maybe even 2 in spring training. Happens every year. And if you go back and you look at the years, you lost Max Fried on the 60-day IL one year. Then you lost Strider. Then you lost Lopez. Like, it happens every year. You lose 1 or 2 guys. I don't think anybody saw 4. And I'm beginning to think, I made the joke when I did a short earlier after the Strider news came out. I'm beginning to think the organization's cursed somehow. That whatever deal we made for 2021, we're still paying for that. And the schedule does you no benefits because you have a 13 games and 13-day stretch to open the year, and you've got to figure out what to do here. I asked AA back late, I want to say maybe it was the post season press conference, like a 6-man rotation. And he said essentially that's not anything they can do all season because it stretches your bullpen. And we don't have very many guys who have flexibility out of the pen. And so it's really hard to leave your bullpen shorthanded the first time you have a starter that gets blown up or has to miss time. You end up in a situation where your bullpen's then shot and you don't have any flexibility. You have to send down a starter to get somebody else for the pen. And so a 6-man rotation's not feasible, but what they did in 2024 was the goal of what they were going to try to do, right? Which it wasn't a formal 6-man rotation, but they like to skip guys. They like to buy extra off days for people, reshuffle and things like that. And my personal theory, I've talked about a few times on the show, what I wanted the Braves to do was to take the guys who, knock on wood, have not had injury concerns and who can pitch every 5th day, like Bryce Elder, and just ride those guys. Had you signed Chris Bassett, I was going to say the same thing about him that I was going to say about Bryce Elder. You pitch him every 5th day. If it's not a guy that you anticipate being one of your go-to options for the postseason, they don't get extra time. They don't get time off. They don't get rest days. You pitch them on rotation and you ride them while you give the postseason starters extra rest. You give your Chris Sale extra rest. You give Swellenbach extra rest. You give Strider extra rest and Lopez and all of that. And now that's kind of out the window because you're just trying to find 5 guys. Again, it should be Fuentes or Richie as the guy that they use. I'm worried we don't have official thing yet. I'm worried it's going to be Perez or even Suarez. I do imagine as teams start to have bad starts to the season, the Braves are going to try to engage to find trades. I saw somebody in the comments earlier say, hey, is now the time you go and get Joe Ryan? I think if Joe Ryan was eligible to get moved, they would have already made a call. Once Pablo Lopez went down, it really felt like if the Twins were going to make a trade, that's when they would have considered it. But I do think you probably call him back today. I do think the cost is going to be high. And that's one of the issues is right now there are so few teams that don't have a shot at the expanded playoffs that the available options aren't very good. And the cost is going to be very high. This may be something you have to ride it for a month. And if Richie or Fuentes looks really good and Strider's prognosis is that maybe he's back to start May or something, then maybe they say, hey, we're okay. But in a couple weeks, if you're having struggles and you're having all of that, I really feel like you're going to have to make a move and you're going to have to overpay because of your decision, because of your belief. And again, defendable, but probably in hindsight, not the right move. But at the time, remember, you can only evaluate a decision by the information you have at the time. And in December or in January, the Braves projected to, even if they lost 1 or 2 starters, to have a lot of starting pitching options. Again, I think it was defendable in December to do something. I don't think it's defendable. It was defendable 2 weeks ago to not do anything, or last week to not do anything, right? When Wentz went down, it's kind of late in the whole ball game. But again, I broke that whole thing down a few minutes ago. Every time somebody went down, there were less and less and less options. At this point, even if you were to sign Lucas Giolito today, you're not going to see him for 3 weeks to a month. Typically, when these guys sign at the very end of camp, these starters, they take so much time to build up in the minors that you don't see them. You probably wouldn't see him until May. And they may say, what's the difference in getting Strider back in May or getting Giolito in May? I do want to also point out, and I mentioned this when we talked about Giolito a week or two ago, there's no guarantee Lucas Giolito is going to be good. Because if there was, somebody would have already signed him. I don't think we can point and say, hey, it's an obvious mistake that Giolito's still out there because nobody has signed him. Now, I will say the Braves have a bigger need to add a starter than anybody else does. So if the first team does, it should be the Braves that do it. But at the end of the day, I'm just tired of these dudes keep getting hurt. And it's not entirely their fault. I will complain that Strider apparently had a bullpen with an oblique issue that he was feeling in his start. That's frustrating. But there's no good options on the free agent market. Lucas Giolito is not going to save this team. At this point, you got to figure it out internally. Is J.R. Ritchie ready? Can Jose Suarez do what he did in a very small sample for you? Can he do it better? Is Martin Perez ready to make it back to the majors? We're going to find out. None of these options are great. But if once they figure out what they're going to do, I'll let you know. This has been a kind of depressing emergency episode of Braves Today for Monday, March 23rd. Do me a favor. Listening on audio, 5-star view would be great. You're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. Hopefully the next time this pings with a show from me, it's not more bad news about our Atlanta Braves. Until next time, this has been